Hello, welcome to Objection to the Forum. I'm here with Geoff Losee today. We've got a fun topic. We're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart, which is breweries. And Geoff is the local go-to guy and expert on brewery law in Wilmington, North Carolina. So I want to talk to you about breweries and kind of it's quite an emerging area right now, and we're seeing them pop up everywhere in town.
It is not just in town, but I think North Carolina is one of the most rapidly growing, and it's the type of business, and we can get into this more. It's the type of business where you can get in. It's scalable, so you can get in at the level of a 3-barrel system, a small system like that. Like for instance, if recollection serves me correct, Flytrap Brewing downtown. I hope that's okay to mention actual clients. Flytrap started with a 3-barrel system, which is about the smallest you want to do if you're going to have a tap room, and they've expanded to, I want to say it's a 7-barrel brew house now, and so a barrel. I'm embarrassed, but I can't tell you how many gallons is in a barrel because I don't need to know that.
Yeah. Well, one of the I remember when breweries started getting big, I would say maybe 2012, 2013, I went to a North Carolina Bar Association sponsored CLE, and it was in Durham. I think they had it at a brewery. And I remember kind of regretting the trip because I went up there, and essentially what they had to say is this is an emerging area. We don't really know for sure what's going on, and you need to read your local city or municipal regulations because it varies across from state to state. And I don't know if things have changed much since then, if there's been a statewide approach to it, or if it's still check with your local city.
So it's both. And the interesting part about breweries, or what I find, well, the most interesting part about breweries is I make house calls for breweries, and I do accept notary fees in beer. So I hope that's not illegal. So I can tell you that a brewery as a business is all the ones that I've dealt with are breweries with tap rooms as opposed to a production brewery. So there was up towards Kinston near Mother Earth Brewing, which is, I mean, you've probably seen them in all of the grocery stores. There was a co-op brewery, and that's a very specific thing. That's a production brewery only, and it's called a cooperative brewing because it's basically somebody owns a brew house and then they lease it out to somebody who's going to make beer and for production, and there's generally not a tap room. But when you get into what we have around here, you've got breweries that want to serve their beer at their facilities, and then they'll do some distribution. Like you can get many of the local breweries here serve it at their tap rooms, and then you can also get it at their beers, or even our kombucha brewery, Panacea. You can get their kombucha at various places. So your question was about local regs. So really the local reg part about it has to do with zoning.
I see.
And in the zoning compliance, that has been, I think there's been across the board I haven't studied all 100 counties, but I know that there are a lot of counties that have made their zoning ordinances a lot more progressive and made accommodations for breweries and distilleries.
Do the laws draw much of a distinction between, you use the term tap room, which I presume to mean a brewery that's serving its own product, versus a strictly mass production brewery?
So there are some distinctions, and those distinctions are of two different categories. This is where you get into, so we were just talking about local regulations. They do include whether or not you can serve on site versus just manufacturing only, but that's where it crosses over into the next level, which is the state ABC, Alcoholic Beverage Commission levels, and the ALE, Alcohol Law Enforcement regulations, and the licensing and permitting that's required there. So there's one license for production. there's an entirely separate license for consumption or serving it. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on what the actual name of it is, but functionally that's what for consumption. So there are breweries that, and they're very specific. The ALE is not just the ALE, but also the feds, and I'll get to that in another snippet. The ALE is very specific about where the consumption is, so that you literally have to provide the Alcoholic Beverage Commission with a diagram.
Yeah, and I guess that's why they don't want somebody sitting next to the barrels, drinking it as it's coming out. Is that what you mean by there's got to be a separation, or
that's right? There's no Viking, putting a tap in the keg and just drinking right out of it. But that also part of that comes from the federal law too. So generally speaking, the rule is thou shalt not serve beer where thee maketh beer. So you'll see in several of the local breweries, either the brew house is behind glass, you can see it because they're kind of neat to look at, or the brew house is behind closed doors, and then some of them there are closed doors, but they have partitions, that so that you can walk by them.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there's any access limitations that are required. Like, is it that you have to keep it sealed off from the general public, and it's got to be a locked door, or does that matter at all?
I honestly have to check the regulation and know if it has to be locked, but it is about limiting access to the public, and really, I believe the reasons for that are twofold, and that's just based on my experience. I can't point you to a specific statute, but the two reasons I believe them are, one, safety, and two, money. And the money part is because the way that beer is taxed is based on, they literally call them taxed tanks. And you have to designate, and now that's driven really by the feds, but the state of North Carolina started getting interested in that, I think about 4 years ago.
Well, yeah, and I would presume so because, I know a lot of the times when you're dealing with wholesalers or, the ABC, you've got your stickers, and, the restaurants and bars are paying a higher tax than we would pay from going to the grocery store or the liquor store. But I guess if you're making your own product, is that kind of what you're talking about? They still find a way to tax it in between production and consumption?
Yes. So what happens is, and this is a vast oversimplification, but that's because
I like vast oversimplification
because I'm a vastly simple man. So the general idea is that the way the feds get money, it's I want to say they classify it as an excise tax. So a brewer has to report to the feds and to the state. You have to report, I brewed this many barrels of beer. I had this much in shrinkage loss. Now that's like, as a home brewer, I can tell you that when I brew a bunch of beer, there's all these calculations about how much am I trying to get out of it. And so sometimes you don't get exactly what you had calculated out of it because the grain absorbs more water than you anticipated, or at least than I as a home brewer anticipated. And then you can have spillage, you can have spoilage, but the feds want to know exactly how much is finished product, and that's what's in the tax tanks. And you have to report that very carefully at your own risk. I mean, if you do not, then the TTB, the Tobacco and Trade Bureau, is the same people that handled.
So you're meant to have a plan going into it of how much you're gonna brew, and then you say, well, it was my goal to get this much out of this batch, but didn't work out the way I anticipated, so this was the final yield.
that's part of it. And for me as a home brewer, I mean the pros, certainly there's software out there that many of them use. Well, I think everybody uses software, and a lot of them have very precise computer controls for their brewing, and they know that if I'm going to, as a matter of fact, well, I'll finish the first thought. They know if I want to brew a 10-barrel batch of an IPA that comes out at 7.6% alcohol, they calculate beforehand precisely, like within liters, how much water's going in, how much grain's going in, how much yeast they're going to need, all of that, how much hops to get the particular hops character they're looking for.
Do you have to keep up with any of this for just your home brews? If it's just for home consumption and friends and family and you're not charging anybody?
No. Thanks to the 21st Amendment, literally, home brewing, which is actually Jimmy Carter's greatest achievement. By the way, Navy grad, Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter was?
Yep. Submariner. Home brewing or home making wine is for home consumption was legalized by the 21st Amendment, and there's no reporting. I think there's technically you're allowed to brew. There's a number of gallons per month that you can make, and you're absolutely prohibited from selling it. But I ain't got the time to brew the amount that you could.
Now, is it just beer, or is it? You said wine. What about moonshine? Can you make that, or is that?
To the best of my knowledge, I haven't ventured there.
Yeah.
Any feds listening to this podcast, I haven't ventured there, and I'm fairly certain that is not legal. Making homemade spirits, as they would say under the federal law. I don't believe that's legal, although the same people that will sell you brewing equipment will sell you adaptations for your brewing equipment that, in theory, could allow you to make spirituous liquors.
Well, but of course, yeah, I mean, and that's what I would want to get. I haven't ventured into any of it yet, but if I was gonna make an investment in a still or some kind of kit, I'd want to have the flexibility to make a little White Lightning if I.
Well, I have a recommendation. I don't know if we need to do that off air.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
But there is a system right now that's out. It's made by a United States manufacturer. It's a great system. It's all in one. It's you can get it. I believe it's only available in electric power, but you can even get it to run on 220 volts. Which makes it can heat water quicker, and so that they're out there, my friend.
All right, well, I like the versatility.
And it's actually very reasonable priced. As I've been getting into home brewing over the last, 10 years or so, I'm buying, one burner here and one pot there, and then I say, ooh, there's a new toy. There's something that can help me brew better, in theory.
So Jimmy Carter's given us the constitutional right to brew our own beer, and I guess there's two different ways where the government can interfere with you: if you're selling it, or if you exceed the threshold of or whatever your limit is by the amendment or the subsequent statutes.
Right, and it's a tremendous volume. It's more than anybody. I mean, if you drank a pitcher a day, every month, I don't think you could hit that limit. I think whenever they did it, they set a very high bar.
That's fair enough too. So you just have to worry. It's just either very large amounts, or if you're selling it.
Right.
And then I guess when we go from there, the question becomes: are you selling it and having people at your home? Well, I guess that's where the zoning crosses over, because you can't can't sell things. You can't sell alcohol to people in your home. But if you're distributing it, or if you have a bar type situation going on.
Right. So you could theoretically get into trouble that way or this is where it could cross over into social host liability. So you ask about breweries. So I mean, as far as the brewery specific, there's not any special social host liability, but every brewery with a tap room, you can be sure has that kind of dram shop insurance. So that's to get back to, well, what is brewery law? I mean, some of it's zoning. Some of it is the federal regulations, like getting your actual brewery plant approved. You have to submit that plan. You submit what's called a brewer's notice, and then those can be amended to the TTB. And what I've seen is that one of the things folks will forget is they'll be like, oh, I'm going to add some extra fermentation tanks, which is one of the secrets to expansion, and is that you can have a 3-barrel brew house because the feds and the state measure how much beer you're making based on how much you can make at one time, like in the boiling process, basically. So it's based on like your brew kettle. But they don't count how much you can have fermenting. So like at my house, I have a 15-gallon pot, and I have 2 7.5-gallon fermenters. So for me, it makes sense. I can and I've got one fermentation chamber because you got to keep your temperatures. So I can brew 15 gallons of beer and split it between the 2 fermenters. A month later, you get your liquid gold. With a tap room or a production brewery, they can make a batch, throw it in a fermenter, start another batch, throw it in another fermenter, start another batch, throw it in another fermenter, and they can. It's an easy way to add capacity.
So are you meant to update your brewing plan every time you so I guess the key thing is what do they call that is the piece that boils it, or what do they?
Brew kettle.
Brew kettle. So that's the determinative factor is how many brew kettles you have.
And the size of them. So, but yes, you do have to update your diagram with the feds and with the state. With the feds, it's tied to, they want to know how much you can make or how much can be fermenting at one time, and that one for sure is tied back to how much money should Uncle Sam be expecting. Because if they know that you can make 500 barrels, they're going to be looking for 500 barrels worth of excise tax.
So you get taxed on what you could make, not what you make?
No. You actually get taxed on what you actually make, which is where we were talking about before, where you can have spillage or a batch didn't happen out. So, but you have to report that. So it starts with how much you could make, and then it's up to the brewery to make sure they report how much they did make.
It's kind of like your magic pipe logs or something.
Exactly.
You've got to account for, we had this, the spillage or the shrinkage or however you want to call it, but you have to say, while we had the capacity to brew X amount of gallons, it didn't work out, and explain it.
Right. Because what they don't want happening is you selling untaxed beer, because Uncle Sam wants his money.
Yeah.
And then the state is looking at that. I wouldn't be surprised for there to be a separate state tax in our not too distant future.
Because you mentioned TTB is, I guess, who you submit your plan to as far as your kettles and to show your production capacity. And you mentioned state approval. What's the state agency? Is it
It's the ABC.
ABC does it? Okay.
Yeah.
So,
very nice people. They've all been there for a million years. It's like they never had changeover in the ABC staff. Which is, the good part of that is that they understand what they're looking at when you send them something. And there are folks who are like, I use him as a contract paralegal, a former ALE officer that helps with getting permits.
Is that Sam DeJackie?
It is.
Yeah, he's outstanding. Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, so Sam will drive a permit to Raleigh, go talk to his former colleagues, keeps the ball rolling.
Yeah, he gets things done, and I've worked with him in some bar restaurant type cases where
Yep.
we had some issues that involved ALE and the ABC board. So he's definitely the go-to guy as far as licensure. And
for me, he is a great asset and a joy to work with.
Speaking of that, that brings me back into dram shop world. And so a lot of times when I'm in a brewery, I'll see the name of the beer and I'll see 7.5%, or they show the alcohol content. So I'm looking for a big number when I'm looking at the board. And are they required to do that because of dram shop?
They're required to do that by both federal and state law. And now it's a very specific. In fact, that's one of the very peculiar, in my opinion, overlaps or unique things about brewery law. So to distribute beer across state lines, you have to have federal approval of the label. And the federal approval of the label includes the name, the text on the label, and it must say where it's made, and it must give alcohol percent by volume, and it must give the number of fluid ounces. And God forbid you put just OZ and not FLOZ. They're very picky about that. And I'll tell you an interesting story about the feds is there seems to be a cyclical concern over names or images. And the famous case, I want to say it went to a state Supreme Court. There's a beer called it's Founder's Breakfast Stout. I don't know if you've ever.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. So, Breakfast Stout is a particular style. They call it Breakfast Stout because it has.
Is that for your all-day drinker type?
No, because it's a Breakfast Stout because it has oatmeal in the grist and there's coffee in it. So that's why that's how it got the moniker of Breakfast Stout. So this breakfast, and I want to say Founders is in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but at any rate, they're nationally distributed. So this Breakfast Stout had a picture of a baby sitting at a chair with like a bowl of oatmeal, and it said, Founders Breakfast Stout. That was approved by the feds, and it's the certification of labels. It's COLA is the short, and I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but it's a subdivision of the TTB. And later, I want to say because of a state disapproved of it because they thought it appeared to promote child underage drinking because there was a baby. Now
that brings back nightmares of con law and the Commerce Clause, and so can the state say, override a federal approval? And
the answer there is no, they cannot. So what turned out was that one had been actually federally approved, and the state said, we don't like that, and there was a lot of back and forth, but by the time it came out, you'll still see that label. If you go get a Founder's Breakfast Stout, it's the same baby. But they've since tightened up. The feds have, and North Carolina is very particular about that. When you see it's something you would not ever, until I got involved with one, a name that was challenged. So I never would have believed that it was a big deal. But names can't both on the federal and state level. So state level, you have to have approval of the name, even if you're just making it in one room and serving it in the next room and it's not getting distributed past your tap room. So when you see a name, like if you see, like last year, if you went to Broomtail, you would have seen a very delicious West Coast IPA called Consigliere GL. That was my recipe that we brewed as a collaboration brew, me and Barry Owings, the owner operator.
That's awesome.
It was, the only reason it came out really good is because Barry's a genius brewer. Well, it had nothing to do with me. But you have to get that name approved. So when you see, like there's a Wilmington Brewing just got one approved, 6 months ago, that's called Palm Island. We've got Palm Island just down the waterway.
Yeah.
But what they're looking for is they want to make sure that those names that they're not sexually explicit. And you could probably, I'm sure you've seen a beer that you're like, really? That's okay to call it that?
Yeah.
And same thing with the images, which is why I think a lot of the local breweries, there's really no imagery on the can. Also, I think it's expensive.
Well, so you're not talking about trademarking the names of the beers.
No, but that's another layer of what could be within brewery law. So brewery law is anything that could be any sort of general business practice. It would include that formation of an entity, acquisition of real estate, leasing. Anything you can think of that would affect a restaurant would come in there. But then as for trademarking, that's one of the things that a lot of breweries will get backwards. Because one of the most valuable things a brewery has is this intellectual property, the reputation it builds for itself, and the name associated with that. I will tell you a little bit of a war story. Panacea Brewing Company, I helped them get trademark that, and had to beat down. There was a Panacea. I don't remember if it was exactly Panacea Brewing, but there was an entity in New York that started using that name, and it was after Panacea Brewing. And the good news is, long story short, Panacea Brewing Company is a trademarked name. And then you can and often should, particularly if you're going into interstate distribution, a brewery should think about not necessarily their name, that could be important, but beer names. Like I can tell you one of them, because I did it. One of the beers in Wilmington that is trademarked is Tropical Lightning. And so I anticipate that Tropical Lightning will be on the road to interstate distribution. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know that, but that's a reason to do that.
It should. It's my favorite of the local beers that we have here. Well, so who approves the names of the beers? Is that TTB and the ABC board?
So usually you do. So if you're just keeping it in state, you're not going to distribute out of state. You have to get it. You have to get the name approved by the ABC board, and they've actually made that very easy. And it's rare that I ever get involved in one of those.
And are they approving, like, for example, can you have multiple names of beers, multiple exact names of beers with ABC? Like, will they let you have, you said Consigliere GL. Could somebody else apply for Consigliere GL with the North Carolina ABC?
I'd have to look that up. I'm not sure that it's like a corporation where you can't have a confusingly similar name. I honestly haven't run into that. if you look at the beer names, like particularly here in town, they go from the whimsical to the very, very specific. Like Wrightsville Beach Brewing's got Oysterman Stout. Could somebody else have an Oysterman Stout somewhere? Probably. Is there another Oysterman Stout in North Carolina? My hunch is that they don't allow duplicates, but I have to say honestly, I don't know.
Do you have to get the recipe approved?
No. The state does not need to approve the recipe. There are certain recipes that have to be approved by the feds, but those are ones where they're outside the norm. So if you're talking about a beer that if we have to, I had to plan to somehow during this podcast say Reinheitsgebot.
What is that?
That is the original German beer purity law. So under German beer purity laws, there can only be 4 ingredients in beer: water, grain, yeast, and hops.
And that's like the Bud Light box, right? Where they put that on the.
Yeah, sure, but that's like Coors Light says, or Coors, we're a cold filtered lager. Well, actually, all lagers are cold. Lager is both a noun and a verb. To lager means to age at cold temperature. And so when I see the beer nerd Geoff sees one of those, we cold age our beer, I'm like, duh, because you have to.
Well, I guess at least they're not misleading anybody.
No, they're not. So, that's just an oddity of a lager versus an ale. But as far as the names, actually, I lost track. Where were we? Were we talking about names?
Well, yeah. What we were talking about, or at least what I was wanting to know about, was with the names of beers, whether you're registering a recipe with the state, like when you say your consigliere GL, and is it the combination of the product and the name, or is it just you're giving notice to the state that you're going to call an alcoholic product something, and they're signing off that it's whether it's appropriate or not?
It's more the latter than the former. So you do not have to get the that's where we were talking about recipes and whether or not you had to get approval. So there are some recipes that need, and again, only in interstate commerce, if they're going to be that you submit to the feds, and that is when there are unusual adjuncts. And really, I think that's because of a food safety issue, because they want to make sure people are not putting out crackhead IPA, now with blue meth, so.
What about, so you got the gravity beer laws, or like that's what I heard the law referred to, and I think that was maybe late last decade when that went into effect.
There was a raise the cap was the name of the movement, because North Carolina itself would only allow beers to have a maximum of, I want to say it might have been 12%. And as a practical matter, there aren't that many beers bigger than that. I think the theoretical limit or the record right now is for a beer is something around 24 or 25% alcohol by volume. So, and that's held by, I don't know if you've ever seen there was a reality show called Brew Dogs.
Haven't seen that.
A couple of Scottish brewers. And that beer, actually, if you've seen the ones that have ice in the name of it, sometimes what they'll do is they'll make a beer. Your generic beer is going to come out at probably about 5%. And if you want to increase the gravity, you can freeze it. Then you take out some of the water, and it's going to there's going to be.
Because I know it's like, you had like Ice House. Like that was always like a headache coming down the road, or Milwaukee's Best Ice.
Yeah,
like that's kind of like that. That reminded me of college days. Like when I would see Ice in the name of a beer, I was like, oh, that's what I'm going for. And I never really understood why, but I guess that's why.
That's why, because by freezing it, they take out some of the water, so then there's more alcohol per volume left. So when they raised the cap. That just opened the door for other beers. But the other thing is that the more alcohol is in a beer, that means the source of the alcohol is from the grain or from an adjunct. Like I have Belgian Golden Strong on tap at my garage. We can go right after we're done. And it's based on a clone of, I don't know if you ever had Golden Monkey by Avery Brewing.
No.
It's a good one. So it's based on that. And in addition to the grain bill, I added sugar. Sugar is one of what they call an adjunct because it's not part of the grain. And that's one way you can bump up the alcohol by volume by adding sugar.
So is 12% the new cap or the old cap?
That was the old cap.
And then now is it just unlimited?
I honestly don't know what it is, but I'll tell you, for listeners, viewers, one of the great resources for anybody, including me, one of the great resources for North Carolina brewers is the North Carolina Craft Brewing Guild, of which I'm a proud member. And they've actually been super on top of the COVID thing and being able to, when breweries were able to open up or reopen or sell, just sell by cans. So kudos to you, North Carolina.
Were they involved? Because I was kind of blown away that the breweries were allowed to open up before the bars, and that never really made much sense to me.
Was there some lobbying done? Yes, there was.
Yes, all right. Well, that explains it then. But I guess I see the difference, or sort of see the difference anyway. Sometimes they're outdoors. Sometimes.
Sure, and it depends on. I think most of the breweries, like Front Street, Wilmington's oldest brewery. Hey, Chris. Chris is the head brewer there. And actually, I learned to brew by taking a class with Chris. It was actually part of a. Did
you take it locally?
Yes.
Where do they do those classes?
Actually, once a month they have homebrewing demonstrations at Wilmington Homebrew Supply Company, which is right there next to part of the same building as Wilmington Brewing, and also the Broomtail has a homebrew shop, and Barry's going to kill me because I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but they have a homebrew shop and they also do demonstrations. I'm not sure what they're, and these were. This was pre-COVID. I don't know that they're doing the demonstrations, but I did that. I went to Chris McGarvey taught the class, and it was part of actually a church brewing league. You've probably heard of church basketball leagues and church softball leagues. Well, at one time in Wilmington, there was a church brewing league, and defending silver medalist, I make the smoked porter.
What's that? It seems like I've seen a movie about. It was. I don't recall the name. It was a drinking contest type movie.
Yeah, I've seen.
And I'm drawing a blank now, but it's an outstanding movie. Where they're trying to drink the beer out of the boot.
Yeah.
Where he's got a. Is that how the church beer league went?
No, it was actually so.
Beer Fest.
That may be it. So beers to be competitively judged. Now we're getting way out. Well, not outside, because you'll see many breweries will say, "Hey, we won a gold medal in the North Carolina Brewers Cup competition," or "We won a silver medal at the Great American Beer Festival." And that's part of, they do that. They enter those competitions for the purpose of getting those medals because it helps them sell beer. And so beers are judged under there's the BJCP, Beer Judge Competition Program. There are specific guidelines, and they're judged on taste, color, mouthfeel. So there's all these various criteria, and they're scored on a 50-point scale, if I'm remembering correctly. 50 points. Could it be 40 or 50 point? I haven't been in a competition in a while.
You ever been a judge?
I've not. I've studied. I've been a server. So the last time we had, again, pre-COVID, the homebrew clubs that are around will usually help field judges. I don't feel qualified. I've been invited to be a judge, but that was because they ran out of people.
Well, what is it? Too much pressure, though? I mean, I'll be a judge if they want me to do it. Like,
I will drink 100 little cups of beer.
Yeah.
No, it's because I know you have to be able to differentiate between the beers and whether or not they're on style. And the BJCP guidelines are very specific about whether they're not on style, which is one of the competition things that I learned later, is that if a brewer is shooting for beer A of style A, style/type A, and they miss the mark, very often they can reclassify it and enter it as style B. And that's where the super geniuses get they take a beer that, hey, I thought it was going to be a West Coast IPA, and now I'm going to put it in as a double IPA because it was too boozy.
But that doesn't seem fair for the judge to be like, this guy might have thought he made a West Coast IPA, but it was really a Kolsch or something like that. But I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, or I'm going to reclassify it. It would have to be. Wouldn't you have to submit your category?
You do.
Yeah. So
when you submit,
so you want to taste your beer before you're submitting it, so you know. So you know what you're submitting it as, right?
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying, is the brewer, before they submit it, gives it a taste, and nobody could mix up a Kolsch and an IPA. I'm just saying.
Yeah, that is true. And so when you're, I guess, deciding the categories in, so are we talking about objective standards, like with the hoppy, the how much hops are in it, or is it just kind of like, this feels like a lager, or this feels like or this kind of tastes a certain way? So
it's both. So when a beer is scored for competition, there are both objective standards, and then there's also the judge's subjective. So there's input in both, which is one of the things where, as far as I'm concerned, you've heard of New England IPAs. That was one of the most recent updates. It went from 2 or 3 different IPA categories to like a dozen in the BJCP, because people kept coming up with this is a New England IPA, why is it a New England IPA? Because we said so. It's hazy. Or a Juicy IPA. Why is it juicy? Well, usually that's because of late hop additions, using ones with that have that kind of juicy characterization.
So is juicy its own category, or is that part of like the West Coast thing?
It may be right now. I could pull up the BJCP guidelines on my phone, but
I'll take your word for it. I mean, but so I like. We mentioned Tropical Lightning. I like that a lot, and I guess that seems like that would be. It doesn't really feel like a West Coast IPA.
It is actually. If you look at the can, it does say it's a West Coast IPA.
Well, I'll be damned.
And I can't tell you off the top of my head what makes it a West Coast. I mean, I have known that at times, but today, Thursday afternoon, sorry, brother.
So they were shooting for a West Coast IPA on this, but I feel it's a little more of a juicy. So is that how it?
Well, I mean, there we're really only talking about for competition. Although in labeling, like I helped get some labels done for a local brewery that in anticipation of out of state distribution, and like one of the adjuncts. Remember, I said there's some adjuncts that you have to actually get approval for, but if you this one was a Juicy IPA, and it was juicy because there was mangoes in it, and where the word mango showed up on the label, it took the feds 3 tries to say no, you can't put it there, you need to put it over here. You can't just say XYZ Juicy IPA with mangoes, or actually I can't remember, either it had to say it in the name, or it had to be, you couldn't just list it on the side where the ingredients are. It's some of it's make your head scratch.
So what about White Claw? Now, is White Claw considered, is that its own thing as a seltzer, or is that considered in the beer? Because I was wondering, where does that fit? Is it a beer? Is it wine?
It is considered a beer by federal regulation. So hard seltzer is considered a beer by federal regulation. And for your hard seltzer needs,
all right,
head to Salty Turtle, a veteran-owned business that's up in North Topsail. Hey, Dan. Captain Dan, formerly Lieutenant Dan.
Yeah.
Captain Dan is making hard cider under the name Surfiz.
So I had no idea that breweries were
Which, by the way, is trademarked.
It is? Well, that's good. I didn't no idea they were getting into the seltzer game.
I think it's one of those things where I think you're gonna see breweries are trying to any brewery tries to distinguish themselves, right? Because if everybody's got the same Kolsch, which it doesn't happen, it's should be impossible, to replicate. But that's also why to be a real Kolsch, you have to be able to see the steeple of the church in Cologne, Germany. Literally.
So it's kind of like champagne or
right.
Tequila, like it comes from a district type.
Exactly. So when you have a Kolsch in the United States, it's a Kolsch style, and I don't know if you'll see that on the label, but sometimes that's why the word says like West Coast IPA style. So that doesn't mean it's necessarily that exact beer, but it's in that tradition.
Well, I'll be interested to see what's going on up at the. Would you say that something fizz?
Surfiz is the name. So there's different flavors of Surfiz.
Because I hope they've got a black cherry. Because the problem with these seltzers is they've got the variety packs, but the black cherry always seems to be the best one. But they'll mix in like grapefruit, or they'll mix in some stuff like that. That's just that. Right. Now, sometimes you can find a just black cherry, but
I can personally attest to that.
Black cherry is outstanding.
Well,
it seems to be across the board.
Maybe it's just because it's the strongest flavor. But I'll let you know. I on Brewers Publications this month they're dropping a new how to homebrew hard seltzer. So I'll let you know. I was thinking about that driving over here. I was like, why would we not do this podcast with an actual beer?
Yeah.
I came right from the office. Didn't have time to stop at home and pick up a homebrew.
I don't have anything but liquor here. I got my liquor club. I don't have any beer here. But it was interesting as far as something else I'm interested in is how do you get your local beers into restaurants? Is there a different layer, or is it just the same as selling to the general public? Like you were talking about, it's a distribution brewery.
Right. So that's one of part of that depends on volume. So after a certain volume, the number of which I can't remember, but it's a pretty high volume. After a certain volume, the state of North Carolina requires you to use a distributor. So most of the smaller breweries or local breweries, which means you're adding a middleman, which means you're going to get less profit. So most of the smaller breweries want to stay under that production cap. I want to say it's like 250,000 barrels, and people are going to put in the comments here, damn it, Losee, you should know that, but I don't. I know where to look it up.
That's why we got the internet. I mean, there's only so many things you can know. I'm with you.
So that's really distribution folks out pounding the pavement. You know,
when I'm out at Applebee's, typically it's just like your Bud Lights, your standard stuff, but they don't. You can't see a lot of the stuff you get in the local breweries.
Right, and like a place like Hop Supply Company. Now that's a franchise, of course, but and they have deals with various breweries that I think they cut for that covers distribution to however many Hop Supply Company or Carolina Ale Company, same type of deal.
I'm interested in this middleman thing. So if you surpass a certain volume of production, you can't distribute your own beer. You have to go through a distributor.
In the state of North Carolina, that's true. I don't believe that's true in every state.
And does that apply for like Miller and Budweiser and some? Do they have to have local distributors?
Yeah, that's why
what's it called, like R.A. Miller or not R.A. Miller? But anyway, there's local distributors I'm aware of.
Exactly, and that yes. So the answer to that is yes. So that your major players, your Miller Coors, your InBev, the artists formerly known as Anheuser-Busch. Those big players, they distribute through distributors, not just because they don't want to have their own trucking company. I mean, some of them do, or they have branded ones, but is because in North Carolina it's the law, and I honestly haven't looked at the history of that and why.
So I was just thinking, it seems kind of crazy to make somebody have a separate company to. And what is the distributor taxed with? Is it just delivering the products from the macro brewery?
Yeah, that's my. This is an area that I haven't gotten into, but that's my understanding, and I think. My guess would be the true history, the stuff they don't want you to know. Shout out to stuff they don't want you to know. One of my favorite podcasts. But at any rate, the stuff they don't want you to know, I'll bet you $1 that law came because there was either a state senator or a congressman that owned a trucking company.
Yeah.
Or a trucking company lobbied them. I honestly would not be surprised.
Do they have to? So, are the distributors related in any way to the bottlers?
They can be.
I think
not necessarily.
But you can bottle your own product. It's just the amount of how much are you producing.
Right, but then you get into the economies of scale, and so most of the local breweries have canning lines that are so many cans per minute, that type of thing. And when you see local bottled products, usually that's going to be a much smaller run because I've never seen an automatic bottler. That may all be done by hand. I don't know. Yeah. But definitely I've stood in, and I've been partially trained to be an assistant on the canning line.
Is that dangerous, like a chicken line type thing? It seems like a lot could go wrong in a beer bottling line.
Well, on the canning lines, it's pretty. If you watch, they probably find something on Instagram of a canning line going, and the cans just slide down, and there's however many spigots, and they fill them up, and then it goes by a thing, and it drops the top on, and then it purges it with CO2, drops the top on, crimps it down, boom, you're done. So there's not too many moving parts, but so I don't think it's like a chicken line.
All right, so that's good to know then. So if you're kind of an amateur brewer, can you kind of walk us through the process of how you get from just brewing for your friends and family to selling your product?
Sure. So actually, I've got a meeting with a fella tomorrow on that, and that's where I think the first thing is really just like any other business is to come up with a business plan. And so when you're planning your own brewery, because that's where you make your money. You make it, you sell it. That's where your highest profit is. So like a tap room, you'd be shocked at the even after labor and materials, you'd be shocked at the profit margin.
That it's low?
Know that it's high.
That
It's
does
like-
not shock me. A lot of times it's like $6 or $7 for a beer.
It's like printing money, my friend. And
I like money.
Yeah, I do
I
too.
watched Idiocracy the other day.
And I don't think I'm letting the cat out of the bag. Certainly not for Captain Dan, but it's even higher for hard seltzer. And if you want to know why there's so many hard seltzer products on, and those they've been growing, Money.
Yeah.
It is because all that is functionally. I haven't made any yet.
Yeah.
All that really is water, sugar, and yeast.
Yeah.
Hops are very expensive. And sugar, I honestly don't know if they're even using grain, because when you make a beer, if we go back to our Reinheitsgebot, had to get it in again. So you're extracting the sugars from the grain. So that's where the sugar comes from, and then the yeast. We say that yeast eats the sugar, and it gives off CO2, which is part of how if you see something that says it's bottle conditioned, that means it's naturally carbonated, and the same yeast that fermented it, carbonated it. So it gives off the byproducts of yeast fermentation are CO2 and alcohol. So, and probably the two most expensive things in beer are hops. As a matter of fact, I haven't read anything about it recently, but there was last year or the year before, there was in the nerdly beer news, anticipation of like a world hops shortage, and the beer prices were going to go through the sky. And now with all the fires, and the Pacific Northwest is one of the huge hops producing areas in the United States, and I'm confident that beer prices are going to go up because right now you think about Oktoberfest. The reason there is Oktoberfest is because right now, August, September is when you harvest hops, and right while they're having tremendous fires out there. And hops are very thirsty plants. That's why they grow well in the Pacific Northwest, because it's usually very wet up there. So sorry, that was a little detour.
Well, so I think what we were going was how do you go about starting your brewery or selling to the public? So we've got put together your business plan.
Right. So your business plan is important, and in your business plan, you need to figure out things like, where am I going to go? So I know when I went to law school, they said you need to open your office where they ain't. So that's part of it. It's location. Where are you going to put your brewery? How much is your rent going to be per square foot? Are you able to buy there and purpose build or not? That's another cost.
What do you mean by that term, purpose build?
So if you go into a strip mall, then you're going to have to figure out how to make a brewery work there, because you're going to need exhaust for the steam coming off the kettle. You're going to need to have to figure out where your waste water is going to go. Those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I imagine that makes sense what you're saying about planning out your lease or whether you're going to buy, because you'd hate to putting all this money into a rented facility and then the landlord says thanks, your rent's now double or something along those lines.
Exactly. And so that's it. That's where the planning to get it from starting a brewery, that's why it's critical to do that kind of planning up front. And then certainly if you're going to look at any sort of bank financing or venture capital financing to pay for this venture, then you need to look at that. So I've actually done private sale offerings, so you can get into securities or making sure you're not in securities law by meeting one of the safe harbors, and that's sometimes what will help potential brewers do. So you're looking at how much beer are you planning to make, and that size. There are like Skytown Brewery or Beer and Barbecue. Their physical setup is pretty compact. Same with Waterman's here in town, also very physically compact. So you can look at that and determine. That's part of how you're going to determine not just where you're going to go, because if you're thinking about taproom sales, you want to be somewhere where you'll get enough traffic, but also you're not going to be in direct competition with somebody else, or make the business decision that I don't care. Like you've got within, by my estimation, walking distance. I wouldn't walk down South Carr Avenue and then down Randall, but like Wilmington Brewing Company is very close to Flying Machine, but they're kind of in different genres almost. I mean, they're both great breweries, but they're in different genres. So you're looking at your business plan, looking at where I'm going to go, what kind of equipment I'm going to use. Is that equipment going to be gas, electric? There are, in fact, like steam systems, which means you're making steam. How are you making the steam? Either electric or gas. Like Anchor Steam. Yeah. Well, that's because that beer is brewed. It's heated with steam. Hence the name. And that's super old school. As opposed to direct fire, which has its own issues. So then you're getting into like actual stuff that I would see as a home brewer.
So once you got the logistics kind of in your business plan, get ready to wind up, I guess that just when you get your Sam to Jackie's, then you go to see the various regulators.
Yeah. So actually, once you've got like I'd say a 30,000 foot view, and you know where you're going to go, you have to know where you're going to go. You either have to have a lease or you've bought it. You have to have the physical location to be able to start your brewer's notice, because it is tied with the feds. So that's where, and Sam doesn't do the feds work. Sam just does the state work. But that's where you can start. Once you've got your location locked down, then you can and should start your applications for permitting. Both, you want to dual track them with the state and the feds. And there's all sorts of information they ask.
So you go it's business plan, location, equipment, then dual track plan.
Well, the equipment you can, depending on where you're going to get it, that can come later.
You just have to have an idea of what you want. You don't have to have the actual equipment in hand. Right.
And then but back to the question about purpose built. So one of the things that breweries, I don't think it's a nice to have, I think it's a got to have, is a floor drain. so that when you get your cleaning stuff off or there's sloppage or whatever, it goes into the floor and it flows out, which ties back into your state, your like local zoning permit, because functionally it's gray water, and you need to have that nailed down. So after you're dual tracking it, then as you start upfit of your brewery, that's when I honestly don't know if Sam's. I think he does. Sam will help expedite getting the inspectors over there, because you have to have, just like a restaurant, you have to have electrical. You have to get basically a certificate of occupancy.
Yeah.
So you have to have electrical. You got to have the plumbing squared away and all of that. So and also, as you know, you got to get the water in to be able to make, and you're talking high volume of water to make, if you're going to start making a bunch of beer.
Well, it's certainly a lot to kind of put all together, and it's you have to know what you're doing, it seems like, to get into that field, but it could be a lot of fun, and I guess I didn't realize it could be so profitable. So maybe I'll have to take the class whenever they get the classes back going, because it's something I'm interested in, and perfect the black cherry seltzer. but Geoff, I appreciate you coming on and sharing all your knowledge with us, and it was good seeing you again.
Absolutely, glad to help.
Thanks.